And welcome, Eve Porcello. Welcome back to React Wednesdays, I
Welcome
should
back.
say.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you both.
Yeah. So for people that don't know you, why don't you tell them who you are, what you do, all that good sort of stuff.
Sure. My name is Eve Porcello. I work at Moon Highway. Moon Highway is a training company based in Northern California. So we teach a lot of JavaScript and Node.js and GraphQL and React courses to engineers all over the place, mostly from this room at this moment, but the engineers come from a lot of different places. So yeah, that's what we focus on and have focused a lot on GraphQL over the past few years. And I am back to talk about more GraphQL things today.
Yay. I remember our previous show on GraphQL. I learned a lot from that, became like a raving fan and almost got a tattoo, but somehow I didn't take that critical step.
There's always time in the future if you want to make that happen. Totally.
Does GraphQL at least have a cool logo? It is kind of a cool logo, actually. Like, I mean, if you're going to get a really questionable tattoo, like that's not the worst one to get.
Totally isn't. I think it's nothing. What could go wrong with tattooing technology on your body, because it never changes or goes away. But I think worth the commitment, I think.
So why don't you, I'll link to the previous episode we did if people want to check it out, but maybe you could just start by setting the stage of like, want to make sure that people that are just hopping in here, what is GraphQL? What problem is it solving? When would you want to use it? Maybe we could start with that. And then I know you want to dive into some more advanced stuff, which I'm excited about as well, but maybe we could just set the stage here real quick for people.
Of course, yeah. So GraphQL came out of Facebook. It was an open source project that they used to really kind of figure out how to load data into an application in a predictable way. So the kind of short version of what GraphQL is it allows you to send a single query to get data from one or more data sources and then get all of that data back in a single response. So that's the idea. We're not asking for data like REST, where we get a huge blob of data. We're being very particular about what data we get back. And it just works pretty nicely with a lot of our front-end libraries. And it really touches everybody who's working anywhere in the stack. So this is why a lot of people are like, how do I use this? It's at my job now. I have to figure out how to work with it. So that's kind of that's the short version.
Yeah, it's funny. Ever since you introduced us to it, now when I see this sort of situation, I think like, oh, hey, that would be so much cleaner with GraphQL. Because like anytime I see like, even in like my own, like, I mean, I write pretty simple apps for like the DevRel type of stuff I do. But even that sometimes like I have some sort of database and I'm like, oh, well, now I have to write like API for like picking out just like this and this and this. Like, and that feels silly. Or am I going to make like 3 database calls and figure out how to piece them together? And like, I miss that, like that granularity that GraphQL lets you like to just like say, here's my backend and I just want this and this and this. And it's quite elegant for that sort of thing.
Totally. I think it lines up really nicely with React too. Not to say that you have to use React. Let me say that really clearly into the microphone. But I think it's nice thinking component wise about what your component displays and then writing a query that fulfills that component with exactly the data that you need. It's kind of it works together very harmoniously, I feel like.
Well, cool. I know you wanted to show some of this off. So do we want to jump into doing that?
Totally. Let's do it.
I'm excited.
Same. So I have some slides, but I'll show code too. But I just wanted to kind of show, we had talked a little bit about kind of how a GraphQL query works. This is, I'm sorry, I'm going to do this again because I'm picky. I'm going all the way. So there we go. We're going to over on the left-hand side of the screen is kind of your clients, so your phones, your computers, your devices. From those, you're going to send a query to your GraphQL server that sits in between your clients and your different data sources. I think something that's really important to highlight about GraphQL is that it's not tied to one particular database or one particular data source. There's a lot of conversation, and I've done it on stage or in talks or things like that, where it's like, we're here to kill REST, but that's really not the that's not the key takeaway, because you can use all this stuff together really harmoniously. So we send the query to that GraphQL API in the center, and then we get all of the data back in a single response. So one of the things I think is cool about GraphQL is it sits in between the front end and the back end. So as I said, everybody who's working on any projects that involve data, they're going to probably be touching some sort of GraphQL server at some point. So there's a lot of cool new kind of approaches for dealing with some of the pains that have come from how GraphQL is designed. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, was like, if I'm setting up a GraphQL server, what are some techniques I can use for making that faster? And then if I'm a client-side developer, what are some techniques that I can use to make the front end faster? So hopefully that sounds okay. You can kick me out at any time. You have the power. But one of the kind of back end things that's popping up these days is the idea of federation. So when we think about a GraphQL API, we're thinking about a schema that sits in between our clients and our data sources. So it's usually one schema. And as we know about managing data, that can become a huge document. Like, all the types start to grow, and it just gets out of control with how big this schema document can get. So the whole idea with Apollo Federation is that or a federated solution of some sort, is that we're creating a gateway where our clients, our React applications, our apps, etc., can interface with the gateway, but pull together data from all of these different APIs. So you can maintain, let's say you want to build your events API, you can build an events API, you could build a guests API, you could build a products API. All of those would be separate, but we would still get the cool benefits of working with one data source, one playground, one graphical server in order to get that data. So let's take a look at some of this stuff, and interrupt me at any point. So what I'm showing now is we have an API for a fake ski resort. So we have lifts and we have trails. So we have a lift service that is giving us a bunch of types. This is a GraphQL schema. And in this schema, we design and define all of our types. So we have a lift type that has certain fields on it. We have a lift status that defines a restricted list of options for whether or not a lift is open. And then we have queries that are going to be accessible by this one API. So if I drag over this lifts thing and I start up this service, this is running on a specific port, specifically port 5000. I have too many screens open, but that is the deal with Apollo Federation, is that you have a lot of services running, and then your computer gets really hot. And if you're already hot in this room, that's a problem. But this is the all lifts query, and this is just serving up some data about that lift type. So think about your objects that are part of your domain, your users, your products, your courses in my case, or whatever those might be. You're going to define that in a specific API for that data only. So that's piece one.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think, like you say, like, you have lots of things running, but I mean, for better or worse, the reality is, in most people's like production setup, that's like the nature of the beast, right? You're gonna have all these things running, and there's at some point there's no way around that. And I feel like what this is trying to do is bring some sanity for working with all of that.
For sure. And that also means that if you're working on a team with, you can have a smaller group of people who are touching one schema versus everybody just like open season hacking away at the schema. And that can be a little bit frightening to start to consider. But basically what we're going to do here is we're going to fire up a Trails server. So we got the trail here. That's just fields about a trail, and then all of our queries about a trail. So that's going to run on its own port as well. So if I'm on the Trails team, I don't have any access. Well, maybe I don't. I could potentially not have any access to that data. And then I can keep all of that information sort of siloed in its own spot, you know? So if we go back to our playground, and the playground, if you haven't had the opportunity to play around with one of these, just think of it as being like an in-browser IDE that you can use with queries. So if you've ever used Postman with a REST API and you're pinging it for all sorts of data, this is that, but for GraphQL. So this has given us all of that data about our trails. So these are two separate services, and we want to think about them as such. They're two different Apollo servers that are serving up just these types. And what we're going to do next is we're going to pull all of this data into a single gateway. So all we need to do to make this work is we need to go to the index. So this is our index file for lifts. And again, lots of different files, but not too painful, as you say, because everything is in its kind of in its own spot. So a couple of things we need to incorporate. I don't know why I'm typing npm commands into a file. I am a professional programmer. We're going to go ahead and type npm install at Apollo/Federation. So this is what we're going to set up in order to make this particular API federatable, which is not a word, but it's a word that we can use to indicate that this could eventually be pulled into a gateway at some point.
Yeah, and it's so basically, just so I am understanding this correctly, like GraphQL sort of like, I don't know, at its basic or by default is just sort of designed to give you like one sort of schema that's like, this is like all my data, right? Everything. Yeah. And the federated, like in my head to federal, yeah, I forgot which word you use. Federationize your data.
Yeah. I like that one more.
Federationize.
Yeah, that's it.
You're more or less like, I mean, it's almost like a componentizing or a React app in a sense, right? Like we're making up all sorts of words today.
Bro,
but
if we ever have a Scrabble team, you are on mine.
Yeah. The Z on a good word score, hopefully. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. We're constantly in the process as developers of being like, let's take this big thing we built and break it into smaller pieces and then duct tape all those pieces back together, right? So this is exactly what we're doing with this schema, which makes it's solving a real problem, which is like, how do we deal with the fact that we're trying to handle one document that's so important? So when I add our build federated schema that I pulled in from our federation thing, this is going to be what we use to kind of pass in our type definitions and resolvers. We saw this last time. Check the tapes on React Wednesday last time, but this is, and I'm typing code wrong, this is, the type defs are our schema, and the resolvers are the functions that return data for that schema. So all of this is just kind of, this is making it such that we can create one single spot to query. All right. So that's step one. And then we want to do the same thing with our trails, which I'm going to copy and paste because I want to respect your time. But we're going to pull in that thing again. a build federated schema. That's going to come from require at Apollo Federation. Once we've included this, we're going to go down to where we set up our server and just swap this out. And then we're also going to remember that we have to install that package into both of these things. So no, we don't want to break our whole app. We do want to install at Apollo/Federation. Okay. So we're just setting up these two different services. Let's say I'm two different people who manage these two different APIs. I'm setting up these services to be put behind the gateway, which is the important part and arguably the more fun part. So we're getting there.
And maybe I'm looking ahead, but I'm assuming at some point, like this is going to like put them all together. So like as a consumer of this, I'm assuming like I won't need to know that this is happening more or less.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly right. So from a developer experience perspective, you can work with your smaller schema. You can work with managing your smaller API that's being hosted somewhere. And then at that gateway level, the gateway is just, as you said, the one-stop place where we go get all of the data, and it will resemble any other GraphQL API. They don't have to know, this sounds weird, but the people consuming it don't have to know that it's a federated service at all. So let me make sure that I've installed the Apollo Federation package into each one of these folders. Whenever I teach this, I have so many windows going on. But the purpose here is that we want to create our gateway.
I just realized they each have their own package JSON file because I suppose they are truly like isolated.
Yes.
Things.
Yeah, they're totally isolated and they're working on different ports. So if I only care about trail data, I can always come over here and test it out. Or if I've built this and I want to test it out, I can come over here to send those queries. It can't be reached because I need to start it. But yeah, the gateway is the place. This is where the magic happens, so to speak. So when we create our gateway, again, we're creating this gateway to kind of serve up all of our data, no matter what types it's for, no matter how we've decided how to decompose this application, everything is going to be there. So we need to be in the Snowtooth gateway folder. Once we're inside of this gateway folder, we're going to install server. We're going to install GraphQL, and we're going to install the Apollo gateway. So while that is chugging along in the background, this is the fun part, because this is where we say, here's our list of services that we want our gateway to consume. So first, we're going to need the server. We'll pull in Apollo server. Then we're going to pull in the gateway. So Apollo gateway. And that's going to come from that specific package there. There we go. And then we're going to need to create a gateway that is literally just a list of any of the APIs that I want to federate. Federation is such a funny word because it sounds so like lofty and important, but it's just literally like a list of those services. Sorry, go ahead.
No, if you want to say sound important at work, right? Suggest this. Like I think our backend services need to be federated.
Yeah, we need to create a federation so that we can orchestrate these services, and then you'll get a raise and it'll be really good. Because you just sound so smart. Yeah, there's a lot of good federation words. We should make a vocabulary website for that, like subgraph and implementing service and all these types of things.
See, if you did that, you could use them in Scrabble.
I could use them in Scrabble, yes. Undefeated, as far as I'm concerned, if we bring those federation words to the table. So what have we done so far? We have created this gateway that has a list of our services. So let's say you have products and users, or what are the types that you want to say, or I don't know, cars and boats. It's a transportation gateway that you're creating. All of these can be listed inside of this services list, and then we can fire it up. So let's take a look at what this looks like. I have hidden my notes so I look less smart. We're going to say create a little function here. It'll be an async function. Now, whenever we create an Apollo server, as we did in these other APIs, we're going to create a server that has a schema, and it has those resolver functions, those functions that are going to return data for the schema. When we create a gateway, though, instead of passing the type definitions and the resolvers here or specifying any schema types on the gateway, we're just going to pass in the gateway, and we're also going to say that subscriptions are false. So what is that all about? There's a type of operation in GraphQL called a subscription. Those work over WebSockets in real time, and they don't work with Apollo Federation, which is sad at this point, but they're probably coming in the future, and you can hack it to make it work too.
Yeah, I have to imagine like the nature of the beast here is that since you're like, this is pretty crazy actually what this is doing, like, yeah. Right? Because it's like pulling together multiple different services and layers. So I can kind of imagine why some of the more complex stuff might not work until they figure that out, because this is still kind of nuts to me.
Yeah, it's pretty wild because I'm almost done writing this file. I'm gonna write one log message to tell me what port this is running on. And then I'll call my start function. But within about, if we cut out the lines, within about 20 lines of code, we have created a server that's going to pull together two different schemas and make all of that data accessible. So even if you had, I don't know, 12 different APIs that you wanted to orchestrate, you could just pop them in this list. And yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, there's like 3 parts of GraphQL that I find highly impressive and amazing. One is you can pipeline everything through a single spot. And otherwise, you're spreading out implementation details of APIs all across the universe. And that there's things we don't do in computer science, and it's spread implementation details around. But somehow APIs, it's okay.
Yeah.
The second thing is you can combine all this stuff and only ask for what you really need and not get back a bunch of garbage, which bandwidth,
totally.
Processing, just noise, security, whatever you want to call it. And the third thing is, because it's all pipelined into one spot, you don't have to worry about, did everyone implement security correctly? It's right there. There's a gatekeeper. It goes, this is a fake ID. Get out of here. But you don't have that sprinkled all over all your APIs either. And it just seems so much more tidy. You know, if you had a big organization with a lot of APIs, there's a lot of stuff to think about. But if you can just push it directly to one spot, now no one has to really care about where stuff's at. That's someone else's problem.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's such a important point, because that organization piece is so important. So even if you're using GraphQL just to proxy your existing REST APIs, even having a one spot where you can say, all right, this is where this is, I can look for this data here and so on, is really awesome. So couldn't agree more. Very controversial that I'm here saying I like GraphQL, but yeah, it's still pretty cool.
Wait, on the GraphQL segment? Chance of a million.
Yeah. I know. I crazier things have happened, but cool. So yeah, we've created our servers for different pieces of the app. We've created our gateway that has a list of these services. Now what we can do is start this thing, I think. Well, we want to first make sure that, and they're not, so that's good that I checked. So we're gonna npm install everything in our trails folder, hopefully. And then this is the problem with the Federation demo, is
Start all the things.
Start them all. Yes, I should write a script for that, certainly, but
tomorrow. Do it tomorrow.
I'll do it tomorrow, right after this. All right, cool. So we got that installing. And then let's make sure that do you know any good GraphQL jokes while we're waiting for this stuff to install?
Googling right now. There's got to be a listing.
There's got to be a listing. I agree.
I am seriously Googling this.
Hard work out here for these Federation folks. Tough stuff.
Nothing good so far. The internet is letting us down. The other thing we've talked about having on the stream is like, because npm installs happen so often, we want to have like some sort of animation, like just like fun thing that could be happening to like lighten the mood, make it fun. Like we've got our chicken, like the Coded Life chicken, which like totally could come out here and like with a laptop or something, right?
I love it. Yes.
The problem is we haven't done this yet, so we need to get on it because this keeps coming up. We need to have some fun.
We need to install some fun when we're npm installing. All right, it's coming.
I don't have any GraphQL jokes. I only have REST jokes. I'll tell them, but you have to request a joke and then the punchline separately.
I like it.
That was actually from a tweet chain in 2018 that you're actually in.
Oh, interesting.
About feeling connected to my purpose and 10,000 spoons and knives and ironic. It looks like you kind of went nuts on what's that lady's name?
Alanis Morissette.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I heard the song a trillion times.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, I vaguely remember that. I probably have been installing something on a different stream before. So, okay, a couple things going on here while that's working. It's happening, everybody. It's happening. So remember that time earlier when we made those different services, federated services? And that was fun that we had. There's this new query on here called service, and it returns something called SDL. So what that means is it's returning the schema. So let's see. The underscore service field, whenever we see that thing, what it's saying is it's making the SDL, the schema definition language, the schema itself, available as this long string. So if I send this query, check it out. We got the whole schema. And this is all the things. And this is what the gateway is going to use to get the schema from this service, from this subgraph, if we're saying GraphQL $1 million words. But over here, I'm going to start my Lyft service. That will have the same thing. And then the most important part is the gateway, which is way more exciting than anything I'm talking about right now. But we're going to go ahead and run start here. And the gateway is going to run on 5,000. So I need to think of a good port joke as well, but it's too much when I'm managing so many processes. But we're going to exactly, and Windows. So we're going to go ahead and pull up localhost 5000. This is a new computer, but everything is slow. So yeah, the Lyft service is running, the gateway is running here, and it's going to get exciting if I can type host correctly.
Local hots, that's not going to return anything.
No, that's much worse. And I have violated some sort of conduct code here. Cannot find module node fetch. Fine. Yeah, the whole idea here is that we're trying to, and I'll let that hang out. We're trying to just create this gateway in front of a couple different services. So there's a lot of opportunities that we find in our life as programmers where we're trying to, I don't know, we're trying to just break things down so it's a little more understandable, more testable, all of those types of things. So this is helpful.
I imagine like in a production scenario, all of these would be deployed. They'd all be out there, but you'd probably only use the main one. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll only probably use the gateway, and that's going to, ooh, I know what that is. This is fun. Are we having fun? That's why. You guys help me. I'm just joking.
You have a great
I just
comment in the chat.
Made typos. Oh yeah?
Mm-hmm. Guy says, I'm new to GraphQL, but you teach very good, man, but your pace is fast.
That's how it is out here in advanced GraphQL. No, I'm just
joking. You got to giddy up in Northern California.
Giddy up, baby. No, this is a very fast pace for this because we're trying to run so many things at once. But I'm going to recap, and those concepts won't be so weird. So
we'll
here's
have links later, I'm sure.
Yeah. So here's what we're trying to do. Remember, we built an API. This is TJ's API, the Lifts API, and he works on this with his team.
Yep.
And then TJ doesn't talk to Dan at all. Dan's in a different location, their timelines and
Just
time zones.
It's
personal.
Yeah, I just don't like Dan. That's
it's hostile, it's tough, and they just can't work together anymore. So we had to break down our API into separate pieces. So TJ and his team can work independently. Dan and his team can work independently, but we have a whole array, and this is everybody in the chat. We have a whole array of React developers, of front-end developers who need to consume data from both of these APIs. So if we look at the documentation panel, we're here on localhost 5000. We're looking at the gateway. So what the gateway has done is it's brought together these two different APIs from these enemies, TJ and Dan, and everything is now together in this one location. So Dan, you'd said before how nice it is to be able to just send a single query and get back. We've talked about being very specific about what types of data we're getting back. So I can send a single query like all trails and grab whatever data I want from that. And then if I send that single query, we're going to get everything back in one thing. So that's really the point.
So beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the thing is too, like, I mean, obviously this example is a little bit simple for demonstration purposes, but anybody that's worked on like a big corporate app knows that like you probably have some user system that's in a different place than your, I don't know, your auth system, your product system, right? They're all in these crazy different, perhaps technologies, databases, whatever. And aggregating them almost seems like impossible.
Totally. Yeah, and this allows you to kind of maintain that schema document, which is really important. It's the thing that describes all of your API's types. You can focus on a smaller surface area and then later on pull everything together. So we've seen this in use a lot, and a lot of big companies are starting to roll this out because they were experiencing a lot of problems with managing that schema document as one thing, because picture working on one document with anyone. That's like, it gets harder as the people, as you start to add people, you start to add complexity. So yeah, this is a really nice pattern for getting around that.
I think especially considering GraphQL, like just as a tech, is kind of sort of designed to be like a consolidated approach. Like you sort of want like everybody at your company using it in a sense for a lot of times. So you don't want to bottleneck to have one document everybody's working on, because it's not like data changes a lot. So
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, I would say another tool to check out if you're interested in more on this is there's something called Apollo Studio. That's a tool from Apollo that a lot of folks use to just manage this stuff, and they have really nice tools for federation. So highly recommend that as well. And it's just studio.apollographql.com. And a lot of, I think I said this already, but I'll say it again, a lot of that stuff is free.
Something that I just thought of is, TD Bank has about 25,000 people in their IT department, which is more than a few. And they're all building apps for internal and external use. And if you can imagine, one of the most common things they need is a customer search.
Sure.
Because obviously you can't really do anything until you're doing it to someone, and they use customers. And they've tried a bunch of different ways to share code, but there's it's an old bank, and there's name a technology. They've got 10 of those and some old ones, and they can't really share anything, especially on the front end, because it's so varied. But, being able to combine these data sets and at least share a data set seems like a nice way to go. And it feels like this did a lot of that combination stuff for me, which means I didn't have to resource someone to do it manually. Is that a fair statement?
Extremely fair. Yeah, I think it feels like it should have to be a manual process. Like maybe you're copying and pasting the schema from one place to another, but Apollo Federation, this gateway is doing everything for you. So, yeah, a simple example, but it's something used in production by a lot of huge companies, and they're like, this is where it's at, because it's really tough to manage that one schema amongst hundreds or thousands of developers. So,
and surely this is insanely expensive production tool, right?
Not really. You can use the everything is open source here. Apollo Studio that I mentioned before will monitor your graph, and that's just a fancy way of saying, like, if I check something that looks good, I'm gonna go back to where I was. It's very beautiful. That was doing that in VS Code when I was teaching earlier today, so that's a treat. We'll see what that's all about later. The tools for Apollo Studio, let's say I check in a change to the schema that breaks production apps throughout the world.
Which has never happened.
No, I don't do that stuff. Certainly not. I have never done that. But you can get a kind of heads up about that before you push it to production. Like, hey, actually, this is going to mess things up. And you can get all of that stuff for free, even for federated services. The things you don't get, there's extra costs for like adding a little indicator to a client to say, oh, this is the certain app that accesses this data, and that's kind of a cool feature. I didn't explain that particularly well, but my point is it's basically free.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's a great time saver. Free is a great price. And if there's some premium tools, great. Like, someone's got to make money at some point.
Totally. Free is one of the best prices, I would say.
Well, and honestly too, like, at least to me, this is more of like a corporate enterprisey type thing. So I'd imagine the companies that have these problems could afford to pay things to help with it, because you're like little startup, like probably like hopefully it grows to where like it gets to this complexity where you need this. But I'd imagine like you don't start from day one with this. You just go with this tradition, like a simple GraphQL setup. And actually, I'm kind of curious, is there a point like what point do you think you need a federated setup? Is it just like when the schema just gets too messy to maintain, and at that point you just kind of break it up and go from there?
Yeah, I think for the most part, most of the folks I'm seeing go to one of two routes. One is the simple first, and then moving on to maybe a federated solution later. But some people really want to start out with that because maybe they have one person dedicated to one type, and they don't want to have to redo it later. It doesn't add that much complexity as far as your files go. And this is something you can do in other languages too. So if you have folks who are building your GraphQL solutions, they don't have to use JavaScript. Like they should, of course, on React Wednesday, but but use whatever you want.
Well, very cool. So Eve, if people are interested in this, or actually if people are interested in GraphQL at all, where should we send them? What are some good places to go? I know you have some training courses that we should point people at that are very good.
Well, thank you for that. I have some courses on Egghead and LinkedIn Learning that you can check out, or How to GraphQL and Apollo Odyssey are great resources as well. I can pop those in the chat. Those are free resources that you can use to get started. We also do a free GraphQL session every month, and we're going to start to expand the scope of what we talk about in those sessions. So you can always check out moonhighway.com for more on that.
Very cool. I am dropping those links in right now. Highway. Very cool stuff. Well, thanks, Eve. This is awesome to have you there. We might have to bring you on for like, I feel like now we almost need to complete a trilogy, right? I
think so too.
If there's another GraphQL topic that comes on, like.
It's got to be Eve.
Yeah.
There's like no scenarios anyone else would do.
We'll bring you in. We'll go with like this, like a Star Wars naming like theme for the trilogy, though.
Let's do it.
So
we can do prequels later, all about REST. Yeah.
There was GraphQL. There's a million APIs.
The GraphQL cinematic universe.
Exactly. A lot of spin-offs in this genre, but awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This was great.
Yeah, really appreciate it. It was awesome seeing you.
You too. Thanks again.
Have a good one.
You too.